Earlier on, when I introduced this segment on the agenda, I promised that we were going to get practical about what works and the challenges that continue to bedevil our implementation of our youth employment strategies. So by way of introduction, let me say that we are extremely fortunate to be joined by our next panelists. They have all made their mark and have worked tirelessly to remove the barriers to youth unemployment, to give our youth a leg up and a fighting chance. So, Mapaseka, Jackie, Kate, and Alex, please join me. Woohoo! And as they are joining us, as they are joining me up here, just a little bit about Mapaseka. Mapaseka says she's from a village in the northwest called Taung. And while she's a big tennis fan, must have been impressed with Djokovic last night, she spent all her childhood playing netball. She also says that you might be surprised to know that she's never drunk coffee in her life. She just grew up believing that it was not good for her. Take that.
My mother.
Okay. And then we have Jackie. Jackie here is a closet builder. Her favorite shop is a hardware store where she moons, and this is my little add-on, over power tools. Okay? It's like moons over those things there. She is project managing the building of her home and has done all the woodwork herself. Wow, Jackie. Take that. And we have Kate here. Her real passion is photography, particularly of water, which she says is so impossible to capture with its light, movement, and reflection. And more recently, she's enjoying silk screening prints of her water photography. She goes on to say her day job is her backup career until she makes it as a photographer. I'm torn. You do such good work now, and I don't know that I can afford to lose you. Okay? And then we have Alex. He loves getting his hands dirty and the kind of work that we do with youth and young people and the messiness of what we deal with in creating jobs. He says he loves getting his hands dirty, particularly in the garden. He loves watching things grow, particularly in pots, parsley, petunias, clivias, and his personal favorite, miniature bushveld fig trees. And on weekends, you will find him tinkering with power tools while listening to jazz. So welcome to this amazing panel.
Wow.
Ag nee man, klop harder. Daar's hy. Okay. So this morning, discussions were quite riveting, right? Riveting, amazing, scary. We heard, if I have to distill some of the core challenges, they said our economy is not creating enough jobs, young people struggle to transition into work, skills and employer demand are often disconnected, support programs operate in silos, and we have not yet built pathways that connect social protection, skills, entrepreneurship, and employment into a coherent system. Now, my panel are not going to do presentations, right? Because they really want to get your voice into the room as well. But having said that, let me at the outset acknowledge the work that each and every one of you do and the results that you have achieved, providing important anchors to South Africa's response to unprecedented levels of unemployment. I know that I've only given you a short time to talk about some of the things that we do, but we're going to get into discussion. But I really just think it is important that you know that the results that you have achieved, the work that you have done, the way in which that work anchors our response to unemployment in the country is seen. I want you to know that you are seen. Thank you. So, Mapasek, I'm going to start with you, and each of you are going to have like about 8 minutes, right? And I want you just to provide a brief overview of Vision 2030 Work SA Youth Employment Strategy. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Nadra. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be amongst friends, really. So lovely to be on this panel today. So I'll give you an overview of what Vision 2030 is, or what we're calling Work SA, particularly the Youth Employment Strategy. So I work for the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, PYEI for short, and the PYEI was launched in 2020 by the President as a response to this critical unemployment crisis that we are also familiar with, and we've heard all the numerous challenges that face young people from numerous panelists this morning. So it is a country's most comprehensive response to the crisis that we're facing, comprehensive because of the way we are aligning ourselves, the way we've organized ourselves as government. We are working towards strategically aligning the various active labor market programs, responses that exist within numerous government portfolios. We are also working to design more effective and efficient systems that can solve this problem of youth unemployment. And we know that youth unemployment is an immediate crisis, one that needs deliberate intervention, because it is not sufficient. I mean, growth, we heard that economic growth, we need growth for jobs, but we have learned that economic growth, while it is a necessary condition, it is not a sufficient condition to ensure that young people are gainfully employed. The data shows that GDP growth, actually youth employment, is decoupled from GDP growth. So even when the economy is growing, young people are not getting absorbed into the labor market. So the Vision 2030, the Work SA agenda for youth employment, is to reduce youth unemployment by 20% by 2030, or alternatively create 1.8 million new earning opportunities for young people by 2030. Now, whenever we present that number to government departments, they say it's so modest, it's so little. 1.8 million opportunities between now and 2030 is not a lot. But this was modeled, this target was modeled against SARB forecasts, the South African Reserve Bank forecasts, as well as IMF growth rate forecasts. And so that's how we came to that 20%. Now, the way that we plan on achieving this target is, firstly, we acknowledge that youth are not a homogeneous group. So they need different types of interventions depending on their distance to the labor market. And our response to this is to we have 5 strategic levers that are going to drive this strategy. The first one is called inclusive hiring. And this is literally making sure that all new entry-level jobs that are added to the economy actually go to young people, that an entry-level job is actually an entry-level job, and a young person can actually access it, not requiring 10 years of experience for an entry-level job, both in the public and the private sector. The second lever is priority growth sectors. So there are a number of, there's 5 sectors that we have identified with huge potential to create entry-level jobs for young people, sectors that have low barriers to entry and that just need a small unlock for those jobs to be created. The sectors are tourism, global business services, the digital economy, the green economy, agriculture, but particularly the fruits and nuts value chain. That is 5 sectors, yes. Okay, so that's lever 2. And then the third lever is demand-led skilling. We heard, I think there was also a question in the morning about how there's a need to change the skilling sector so that it is more responsive to the labor market demand. So part of our intervention is to revolutionize the skilling sector, and that is work that we're doing with the Department of Higher Education. The fourth lever, also a topic that was talked about this morning, is sustainable self-employment, so equipping young people with the support that they need to start something for themselves and to make sure that those businesses are sustainable, particularly in the informal economy, because we know that South Africa's informal economy, we don't have a lot of counted activity in the informal economy. Although we know it's thriving, it's bustling, young people do need quite significant support to make sure that they don't end up in precarious earning conditions in that informal economy. And then the fifth lever is public employment programs. And of course, my colleague, Dr. Kate Phillip, leads the broader work of public employment programs. In the PYEI, we have a youth-specific public employment program called the National Youth Service. So those are the 5 levers of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention that are working towards this Vision 2030, 20% reduction in youth unemployment. We have a number of flagship interventions that are practical ways in which we are working within the labor market to reach young people. The first one is Jobs Boost, which was an outcomes-based pilot, one that took significant learnings from the Bonds for Jobs pilot that Jobs Fund did a few years ago. So we built on that, and we created 4,500 verified jobs in this first pilot, and we're planning to scale it. So the National Skills Fund will be transformed into a outcomes-based fund. The second intervention is the National Pathway Management Network, but my colleague from Harambee will speak more about that. To explain what that is, it is a network of networks where we realize that there are so many players in the ecosystem that are working towards solving youth unemployment, and how do we bring them together so that we can work together and that our programs complement one another as we try and solve this youth unemployment crisis. The third intervention is the Innovation Fund. The Innovation Fund forms part of the NPMN, and this fund is really meant to support pilots, those innovative ideas that are addressing barriers that young people are facing, with the vision of scaling that pilot. So when we see that something works and it is addressing an issue like BPS, we want to scale it, we want to integrate it into government. And then our fourth and final intervention, and I'll stop after this one, is the National Youth Service. So this is the PYEI's public employment program. The National Youth Service, like a public employment program, is one that reaches young people wherever they are across the country. It is 16 hours per week of community service, and the young person is stipended for that time while gaining experience and also servicing their community. So,
Thank you, Mafaseka. Over to you, Alex. So you're a long-standing partner of the Jobs Fund. Can you just provide us with a brief overview of the barriers that Harambee initially sought to address, right? And now, in the more recent years, you've also been appointed as the National Pathway Manager, as Mapaseka has said. It's a component of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. Just the high level, kind of, what are those barriers that you're seeking to address?
Thank you, Najwa, and thank you, everybody, for being here. And I feel very privileged to be sitting here with people of this caliber on this stage, including you, Najwa. Thank you for your kind words too. So Harambee is a social enterprise, meaning it's not a private entity, it's a socially funded organization that aims to solve youth employment issues through partnerships. On a high level, we sort of try to address what we see as 3 almost issues or barriers or frictions in the labor market. One, which is the one that we've been working on longest, and with the Jobs Fund for, is it now 14, 15 years, is a supply-demand mismatch friction. We also phrase that as barriers to entry, particularly for young people getting into the labor market. What do we do in that respect? The biggest thing we do in practice is we run a application called the sayouth.mobi site. That is the young person facing site. We've got almost 5 million young people that are registered and that have received some form of work-seeking support on that site. The employer-facing site is sayouth.co.za. Anybody interested can go and look up those sites and participate. And that engine is an inclusive matching engine where we use some inclusive proxies and screeners and alternative ways to match young people to jobs. We can get into that a little bit later. Another big issue that we see in the labor market and that we've been addressing for a long time is just that there's simply not enough jobs. That issue has come up multiple times. We currently address that in a few different ways. One is to help with labor market intelligence to identify the type of sectors that Mapaseka has talked about. A second is to, where necessary, intervene and try to unlock some of that sectors. Harambee has been instrumental in unlocking some of the jobs in the global business services sector. We've also been currently funding and supporting the Collective X to do something similar in the digital sector, and are also active in both the tourism, IRM, and agricultural sectors at the moment. We are also currently spending a lot of energy trying to figure out how to unlock more jobs in the informal sector. So I actually just want to say we are so supporting everything that's been said about the informal sector over this last day and a half. We have pulled Prof. Borat very close to us and trying to help us figure that out. And the last, maybe the most recent friction or issue that we've addressed or have we seen in the labor market is that we are a relatively young and a bit up to now uncoordinated ecosystem. The coalition of the willing, as we sometimes call it, which I think everybody in this room is, needs some coordination, some tracking, some gathering of the troops, and it's a job that I will admittedly say I don't think we've completely figured out yet. But in that bucket of issues, we do things like run the National Pathway Manager Network, which is the coordinating infrastructure for government, business, and the social sector to come together with solutions and ideas to solve this big issue. We also do some tracking of the various activities in that forum. We actively participate in other people's initiatives, for example, Community of Practice for the PEPs. We generate insights from our data. We do some modeling to support other partners like the PYEI to figure out how much we can get in these various initiatives. And importantly, particularly over the last year or so, we do a lot of convening of government, business, and social sector partners. Over the last year alone, I've been involved in this particular sector now for over 10 years, and I've never seen as much interest from the private sector in this topic as we've seen over the last year. That doesn't mean that it's all led to action yet, but if there's a leading indicator of engagement, then the private sector interest is certainly growing. Just quickly for a little bit of background for Harambee, we are very much funded partially by government and partially by donor money. Those donors are very much aligned with our systems change agenda. We believe that in the longer term, the bigger change we need here is systems, not individual interventions. We believe that linking interventions and programs, we quite often talk about pathway management is the way to go. So we see our funders, there's a monetary effect, people give us money, but there's also partnerships, which actually forms part of our funding. We fund others through partnerships and other funds us through partnerships. Maybe just quickly a few numbers of our, where do we think our impact in the labor market has been. One is just through our ability to use technology to scale. So I've mentioned that we've got almost 5 million people registered. Not every one of them are on the site every day. We've sort of witnessed or been part of linking over 2 million job opportunities. So I've got a rich data set to learn from. We are talking about youth that in our definition is 18 to 34-year-olds, under 35-year-olds. It's aligned with the stats, sorry, frog in the throat, Stats SA definition. And we sort of focus on, and all our impact data supports that we've been able to help women disproportionately. We've been able to help young people disproportionately, even within that youth band. So the people under 25. And our programs have also been able to reduce the cost of work seeking using the technology, and just helping more people get that first job. I'm going to pause there and get back to questions. We are still on time, right?
Yeah. No, that's great. And, you know, to the audience, I think that something that you might not appreciate in some of the things that Alex has said is that, you know, institutional capacity is a very, very important thing that we need to build in our country. And it doesn't happen, you know, within a single budget cycle. And the point that Alex had made that, you know, we've had a long-standing relationship with Harambee, you know, supporting the organization in building their capacity. And that investment paid off when we were hit with COVID, right? We used that platform to be able to reach the people who needed to be reached, right? And get the payments out. But if we did not have the vision to invest early on and to walk the path, we would not have been able to respond in the manner in which we've had if we hadn't done that, right? And then again, when we said, right now there's the presidential youth employment intervention, okay? And we went back, and so we continue to leverage institutional capability that was built up over the years through a partnership between government, private sector, philanthropic organizations, and others. And by government showing up in that way, organizations like Harambee has been able to signal to the international market that South Africa is invested, and the back of that be able to raise additional funds for the work that they do with young people. I just thought it's important for us all to understand that, you know, you can have the greatest of programs if you do not have the institutional capability to implement, you're not going to go anywhere, and that's what it takes. It takes stamina, it takes time, it takes commitment. Kate, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to ask you, okay, because like, you've just been central to a very important program that we have. The research this morning spoke to us about, you know, this important anchor that public employment programs play, and you've been at the forefront of design, but perhaps everybody in the room is not quite familiar, so perhaps if you could share a little bit, you know, the work that you've done with the public employment stimulus and the social employment fund.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you again for the introduction, and to reiterate what Alex said, which is that you have contributed in your own amazing and powerful way. I think that what I'm enjoying about the way the day has gone is that I think we're getting a real sense that there are no silver bullets, that all these different interventions need to be mutually supportive, that no single intervention can carry the weight of this crisis alone, and no single intervention has the solution alone. And we're starting to frame this as something called Work SA, which Mapaseka referred to the Vision 2030 as part of Work SA, where what we're saying is we need a Work SA agenda that brings together all these different components and looks at how they align better. And that's very much where the ALMP report that we heard earlier is speaking to that same need. So in what I'm going to be saying now about the public employment programs, just hold in your mind, this is one part of the picture. The presidential employment stimulus started in the context of COVID. We already had an unemployment crisis, and we had a long track record of public employment programs. But in the context of the pandemic, there was a level of what I will call policy panic. because we were losing jobs. We lost 2 million jobs during the pandemic. And that policy panic created an opportunity to do things differently and to do things at scale. And I fully hear what Lauren is saying about the real potential trade-off between scale and quality. At the same time, we need to reach scale because we have a crisis at scale. What the pandemic did was create a unique policy commitment to scale for public employment. And we were able to expand public employment at a scale that has not been done in the country before through the presidential employment stimulus. It was a whole suite of programs. It was a case of saying, anyone with a good idea, come forward, we need to roll out. We had 15 departments participating at the height of the program. At the height of the program, we had, 15 departments participating, but that has been whittled down to a much smaller number of core programs that I think offer particular value in their own way. And I'm going to briefly describe 3 of those, because National Youth Service also kind of overlaps with the employment stimulus, but it will be spoken about, has been spoken about and will be spoken about. So our largest program is the Basic Education Employment Initiatives, earlier was called PYI, that places about 200,000 young people in schools in every cycle. Just out of interest, anyone in the room was a participant? Anyone in the room participated in that program? Not. Okay. Oh, yes, we do have one. Good. I can usually find at least one person in a room of young people who has participated in the program. So that program, as I said, places about 200,000 young people in 23,000 schools across the country. What is unique about it is that every community in the country has a school. And schools have institutional infrastructure. They have a management system. They have payment systems. Schools were able to put up their hands, and it was voluntary. Schools could opt in to say yes, and they all did. We want to be part of this program. And for a school to take 10 to 15 young people into the school didn't break anybody's back, didn't break any systems, was not disruptive, in fact was hugely supportive, not only during the pandemic, but after as well. A key thing about that program is there's almost a one-to-one mentorship relationship often between an education assistant and a teacher. People are getting a very high-quality learning experience. And that really matters because we need the work experience to deliver capabilities and capacities. I think part of the challenge when the stimulus began was actually to say, how do we do public employment a little bit differently? Public employment programs have a long track record all over the world. They can work very well. They can also be awful. There are many public employment programs around the world that are awful. They offer very short-term work experience, 2 to 3 months at very low wages, called stipends because they aren't wages, with poor working conditions that send a message to participants that this is not real work. And when the work sends a message that this is not real work, it undermines the whole purpose of participation in work. It undermines the added value of enabling people to participate in work. But those are design choices. Public employment programs can offer meaningful work that gives people a sense of dignity and purpose and can build capabilities and provide them with steps towards pathways. Again, no silver bullet. And so we saw the key challenge in the context of the employment stimulus is to say, we have this unusual problem in South Africa. We're not the same as the developed world. Usual active labor market policies are not what is going to work. How do we reimagine public employment for our particular context to deal with our particular problems, to deliver a quality work experience? And the importance of work experience, even though it's a time-defined placement, it varies per program. But even though it's a time-defined placement, work experience matters. Why does work experience matter? The data shows us that people with work experience are 3 times more likely to get employment, but also people whose long-term unemployment has been broken by a short-term opportunity, work opportunity, are double as likely to get employed as people in long-term unemployment. But the work experience also matters because of the capabilities it builds. And employers say that, and that is important. Time management, task management, accountability, responsibility, communication skills, all of these things are vital capabilities for the workplace, but not only the workplace. What we've also learned is that these skills are just as important for going into self-employment, for going into livelihood activity. And in a context where the jobs don't exist, our focus has pivoted a little to how do we better use public employment to support that. So now I'll talk briefly about the Social Employment Fund, which is a different model. So the schools program is targeted at youth. Social employment is also majority youth, but it's a mix of ages. And the Social Employment Fund is a particular model that partners with non-state actors in civil society in recognition that in most communities in the country, there are organizations trying to make a difference in different ways in relation to all kinds of social challenges that are faced. And so the purpose of the Social Employment Fund is to give support to work that is already being done, to amplify it, to scale it, to deepen it, to address a range of social problems. One of the quotes from the president that we often use is, "There's no shortage of work to be done to make South Africa a better place." And we need to use public employment to create social value, to really add value to make South Africa a better place. So the Social Employment Fund is doing things like food security, supporting paralegals to provide support to survivors of gender-based violence, catchment management and a range of environmental programs, early childhood development, public art, therapy for kids through art, anything that fits the category of what we call work for the common good. If it's work for the common good and communities want that work to be done, and there's agency and energy behind that, it can be supported through the Social Employment Fund. That program is a part-time program, and one of the theories of change around the program is that with 2 days of work a week, over a longer duration of time, so people stay in the program for longer, participants can be supported to engage in complementary livelihood activities. That might be further education, or it might be a hustle. It might be starting a micro-enterprise. What we are seeing is that layered support where there's regular and predictable participation in a public employment program, coupled with support to complementary activities, actually helps people onto that post-program pathway more effectively. I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. Jackie, over to you. You just want to share a little bit about Year Beyond and what are the key barriers that your program is designed to address?
Thanks, Najra, and thanks to everyone. It's lovely to be here. So we are part of the National Youth Service and our youth service program. We've been around for quite a long time, so we're in our 11th year, and I guess we aim to do 3 things. So we focus specifically, we're slightly different to some of the other NYS partners, we focus on under 25-year-olds. And the reason we do that is because we recognize that long-term unemployment destroys confidence and a sense of being. And that is one of the things you need in order to be active in the economy. And so we want to catch young people before that huge barrier becomes really difficult to turn around. And so we focus on 18 to 25-year-olds. And we put a lot of emphasis on rebuilding their confidence and their sense of well-being and creating opportunities for them to engage and understand their role and value in society. And I think that that's really important. We can't solve all the structural employment challenges that we've spoken about. But what we can do is we can create stepping stones that help people navigate this very complex and very often barrier-filled environment in which they find themselves. And that requires real resilience and grit. And so that's one of the things we do. We are a social franchise network, so we have 64 partners who implement. And building on what Kate said, it's really about saying in every community there is work for the public good that needs to be done. There are public spaces that need the capacity of young people to make them better spaces. And they're very often local organizations that are committed to making a real difference. And we're bringing all of that together in creating this opportunity for young people to serve their communities, while they're serving their communities, to close the inequality gap that we find ourselves in. Very often they work with children, or they work with old people, or they work with communities who are particularly marginalized. And while they're doing that, also focus on themselves and building some understanding and stepping stones towards their own future. So we put a lot of emphasis on the role of a mentor. And so the youth work in groups, and the group of young people gets a mentor, and the mentor is really there to support them and to help them to navigate the acquisition of competencies and skills, as Kate spoke about. And we have a curated program that really focuses on building core competencies that you need, whether you're studying, working for yourself, or going into a job, around work readiness, around emotional intelligence, and around agency. And that's what we focus on. And in building those competencies, unlock young people's agency, their engagement in their communities. And there are impacts in terms of, over 70% every year since we started progress out of the need status into either studies, self-employment, or work. But there are also a number of other indicators that talk to what sits behind that, the increase in confidence. 98% say they now feel ready to enter the world of work. The increase in life satisfaction, the increase in community engagement. They are 52% more likely to continue volunteering in their communities than other young people, which builds social cohesion and closes a whole lot of gaps in those communities. And I think that they are very often better prepared to think about how we change the next generation, because a lot of the work they're doing is with children, and so you're actually training the next generation of parents, caregivers, etc. I think the other thing that's very important in all of this is that as we work with young people, we realize that there's a level of creativity and energy that we're just not adequately harnessing. And unlocking that just does magic in communities. So we see coming out of the program, a number of young people have set up their own community organizations. A number of young people have started initiatives that reach out to others. And that's really what we're unlocking, is we're unlocking citizenship when we're unlocking these young people. I think that there's no question that young people are hungry for opportunities. And so I think Lauren spoke about it earlier, and I think others have spoken about it. They're hungry for opportunities, but what they are missing is they're missing the scaffolding and the easy access to the scaffolding. And I think that's really what we focus on. I think that we also start making young people visible in a society that often makes them invisible. And I think that that is really, really important. And I think that a key part of our role is building the ecosystem that enables that to happen. So we heard about the well-being. We have a psychosocial ecosystem with a whole lot of partners so young people can get support. I'm always devastated by how many young people have been or are survivors of gender-based violence and get triggered in the work that happens and need that support and haven't had that support before, as an example. I think that there's also an ecosystem of social networks where most young people have come out of households that haven't had working adults in the household, and so they don't have the network. So where do you even start when most things happen through a network? So it's about building that ecosystem of networks. And I think that the other thing that's very important is starting to curate like possible pipelines for careers in different ways. And I think, Kate, you spoke about it in the self-employment, but I think, 30% of our young people, we do a lot of work in schools. 30% of our young people go on to be teachers. They are the next generation of teachers, and they're people who have worked with children, discovered they loved it, and then go and do teaching. Not people who thought they would like working with children and then discover they hate it, which many teachers do. Similarly, into the health sector, into nursing, into libraries, into sport. And so I think we're helping young people unlock and find their passions, and that becomes really important. And I think we often underestimate what exposure does. And I think public employment programs have a huge role to play in exposing people to different things, because we don't know what we don't know until we've tried it. And, we're giving people the opportunity to do that. And, I think the last thing to say in relation to this is that it's very important that there's a diversity of activities. And what I love about the National Youth Service Program is it allows, and it's very similar with SEF, it allows people to work in multiple spaces so they can choose where they feel some resonance. And I think that very often what that does is it unlocks new possibilities that might not have been there before.
Thank you, Jackie. So I will not be doing my job if I don't ask them a few questions, right? But I am going to leave time for all of you to ask questions. I'm going to start with Mafaseka. Mafaseka, so how does the strategy that you have outlined move us beyond individual programs towards systemic change?
So, I think one of the hardest things with the strategy is that it depends on so many different players. There's so many different departments that have a role to play. Organizations outside of government, the private sector, as well as our CBOs, our NGOs in our various communities. So the toughest thing with this is coordinating this broad ecosystem of players, like bringing people together in a room to agree on this is how we're going to solve youth unemployment is extremely difficult because departments have different mandates. The private sector also, they have their mandate, and CBOs are always trying to contribute to solving the challenge. But what we are proposing is to have Work SA or the Youth Employment Strategy as the shared framework across government, to have it adopted as this is the shared framework that we are going to address youth unemployment as a whole of government approach. And the processes that have been followed to date have been fairly positive. We had good reactions when we presented the strategy to various departments, and we are hoping to get it adopted at Cabinet within this month, actually. So then we will have this Work SA Youth Employment Strategy that is adopted by all of government, and we will have a shared vision of what it is that we need to unlock, what it is that we need to do to unlock youth employment in our country. And a lot of the activities, the deliverables or the milestones under this strategy do relate to reform change, to looking at how we incentivize businesses even to create opportunities for young people. For example, we're looking at expanding the, the Global Business Services Incentive, which, by the way, is the only incentive within the DTIC's portfolio that has a youth employment creation mandate. So looking at the portfolio of incentives and seeing which ones can be pivoted to also include a youth employment mandate. That way you have that mandate as a department to take care of young people and to create youth employment opportunities for young people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mafaseka. Alex, over to you. How do we ensure that rural youth, women and young people with limited networks are not left behind?
Oh, I wish I had the answer for you to say that here it is, and if that's the case, if we do this, it won't be the case. The answer is actually similar to Mapaseka. It is taking a systems approach where we find ways to engage all the tools at our disposal. I think you are rightly implying that in those outlying areas, in rural areas, people are not as digitally literate. Neither do they have, at least currently, the same digital access to, say, for example, Harambee's flagship tool, sayouth.mobi. So if we don't find a way to collaborate with the NYDAs of the world, of the DEL centers, with the bricks and mortar centers, that predominantly is in the hands of government institutions. If we don't find a way to partner and put the BPS solutions and the SA Youth solutions and the public employment solutions in all those places, then we will be left behind. So I think Kate used it's something around, we can't think about a program, we need to think about the whole pathway solution. And I think in those cases, it's even more the case.
Thank you, Alex. Kate, how do we move young people from programs and training into actual jobs rather than leaving them trapped in the cycle of the many, many interventions that we have?
I wish we had an answer to that, and I think today has challenged us by highlighting that the problem is on the demand side. That where there are no jobs, it doesn't actually matter how many interventions you introduce. We do need to deal with the problems on the demand side.
Yeah.
That said, we can't just wash our hands of the problem and abandon young people to their fate. I mean, I do think programs like public employment raise aggregate levels of employment. We saw that in the latest QLFS, where the school program ended in December, didn't start again in January, and the single biggest cause of the drop in employment that caused a lot of shock and horror in the media was actually the loss of that program. So there we were able to see very starkly that actually we raise aggregate employment through these programs. And important as it is that the programs meet the needs of participants and strengthen their ability to navigate systems, and important as it is that the programs create social value, we also do have to understand them as systemic level interventions also. Because society as a whole suffers when we have this level of unemployment. Communities suffer. The knock-on effects are terrible. So even though for individuals, it's not a packaged solution that offers a quick pathway into a job because the jobs aren't there, nevertheless, it's contributing to the systemic level impact of unemployment by raising aggregate levels of unemployment, but also through the economic stimulus effects, which are, it's partly about labor market intervention, but these programs are not just a labor market intervention in the sense that the wages that are earned by participants are spent in the local economy. We have evidence that shows, you heard from Josh earlier, evidence from the Basic Education Initiative that shows that that spending can actually be tracked through the economy and is sustaining and creating jobs at other levels. So it's also part of our problem when we look at these programs just at a kind of project scale and at an individual. We also need to look at them in terms of a level up. What is their systemic impact? But for them to have systemic impact, they have to happen at scale. And they have to happen with a level of spatial equity. They have to target rural areas, which they happen to do very well. So for me, part of the answer for Alex's question is we need more public investment in those areas that markets leave behind. So no silver bullet here, but hopefully I've answered your question.
Thank you, Kate. Jackie? So the LMP study highlights that labor demand differs dramatically across regions, with some former homeland and rural areas experiencing extremely low employment rates. So my question to you is, should employment policy look different in metros versus rural areas?
Thanks, Najwa. So there certainly is a huge difference between metro and non-metro areas, and we see that in the stats, and we see that in the amount of jobs created. I think if we look at that slightly differently, and I think this is where the public employment programs have been so interesting, because they've started to see work in a different way. And we think about what are the care economy needs, what are the other needs that exist in every community, but very often more acutely in rural areas. And what are the opportunities there? And I think one of the things that we maybe haven't given enough attention to, and you spoke about it earlier, is the institutional capacity that is needed to ensure quality public employment, youth service programs, and what that means at scale. And recently we did a thing where we looked at our internal pathways in Year Beyond, and 5% of our youth come back into the system in 5 or 6 different roles, but they come back into the system as mentors to the next cohort of youth, as data administrators, collecting the data and processing the data and stuff, as navigators, helping to navigate and make those links. And I think that we often underestimate the value of those economic stimulants in communities. So maybe where the shift is needed is to start to recognize that all these partners that have been mobilized around these programs are playing an important role, and to start putting some indicators on them around how are they creating opportunities that enable more sustained stepping stones. And then, you know, once you've been part of one of these programs, you've maybe transitioned onto something, and then you take a step into something else. You go into that something else with a whole lot more, you know, whether it's your own thing or something in the market. And one of the things that we've done, and I think it links to this, is we've set up our own training academy to prepare people for all these different roles. And I think that that's where we need to start looking at, is how do we build that institutional infrastructure so that things can happen differently, and recognizing that we might never get a massive call center or a massive opportunity in a particular area because there just isn't enough of the rest of the infrastructure that's needed. But there are other things that can happen in that community that allow for similar kinds of stimuluses. And I think that maybe in our public investment, we need to start thinking about those things. Schools have been leveraged with the BEI. What are we doing in libraries, which are becoming white elephants? What are we doing in clinics? What are we doing in Tucson centers? There's a whole network of public infrastructure that we have not adequately leveraged with our investments. And how do we do that? And how do we build the pipeline? And maybe that's going to bring some of the change.
Thank you, Jackie. Perhaps, looking ahead, what is the one bold shift South Africa must make if we are serious about changing the trajectory of youth employment?
Oh, wow. Just one bold one?
It's the bold question.
I think it would be to value work, to value meaningful work differently. And I think a lot of the speakers have alluded to this. And I like that quote that you mentioned about the president. There isn't a shortage of work that needs to be done in the country. And it's a matter of how do we structure the market incentives to value that type of work. I look back to my own community. I was home in Daung recently, and I'm sure we can all resonate with going back home and seeing the public infrastructure just dilapidated, and how it aches your heart. And you're just like, this is the work of young people. The work of government is, you know, young people should be doing the work of government, meaningfully doing it, contributing to sustaining and making sure that our society is held up high, and at the same time making sure that young people have dignified living standards, or they maintain dignified living standards. So I think we need to change the way we perceive, work, and the way we define work, and how we incentivize work. That's worth doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Alex, the LMP review suggests that South Africa's employment system is highly active, but not sufficiently impactful. If you could change just one thing in the youth employment system tomorrow, what would that be?
I would go for easier access for everybody, including youth, to the informal sector.
Thank you, Alex. Jackie, if Treasury gave you an additional 10 billion for youth employment, where would you invest it and what would you stop funding?
So at the moment, only 100,000 young people get access to youth service. Every single young person who's unemployed should have access to it. So I think I would invest it in making sure that every young person got an opportunity, number one. Number two, 6 months is not enough. 6 months doesn't launch you to anything. So let's give them a year, let's give them a proper foundation. And thirdly, if it was possible, I would make the youth service bit of it full time. Young people need to build work fitness. And then, as they've built that fitness and gained the experience, they then need to have the transition support, which I think a lot of the part-time programs do, to then start looking at what next. So those are the three things I would do with it.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. Kate, if you could change one policy or remove one constraint tomorrow to accelerate youth employment, what would that be?
I'm going to say two things. The first is, I actually think this is a global issue, that we're having to come to terms with the fact that with technological change and other change, it's not only here, it's actually increasingly a global issue. We cannot rely on markets alone to create meaningful work for everybody in society. But society has to make sure that everybody willing and able to work can contribute meaningfully and create social value. That's a very profound shift in thinking that I think is actually part of a much bigger discussion about how we think about the relationship between the economy and the society. So that would be the big picture issue. But I would then come back and say, everything I've heard today is saying there is no one thing. Everything I've heard today is it needs all of us. It needs complementarity, it needs synergy, it needs us to recognize the value in different interventions, join the dots, build the ecosystem. So maybe that's the one thing, is to build the ecosystem of collaboration, cooperation, synergy, and for integrated approaches.
Thank you, Kate. And so before I turn over to the audience and give them an opportunity to ask their questions, team, can I have the video, please? So just before, there we go.
KZN Mhlabelingana, a lot of people have lost the spark. They've lost hope.
As a youth, we do not have any activities to do. I realized that there's something missing.
Cinema brings light, brings hope, not only into the room, but in one's soul. It touches their core. When you are watching a film, you relate to it. You get a sense of, I'm alive. I can change my life and I can change others' lives.
When I was facilitating Utando at Sugasambe High School, a girl just busted into tears. She said she's crying because she's seeing herself in Utando's life. She didn't know where to go to, but now she's glad that we came into her school.
what Sunshine Cinema Impact facilitators do, they serve as a doorway to people's emotions using film. All the themes that are highlighted in the film are the social ills that we face, that we know. Everyone knows, but no one is communicating it. So having a platform whereby people come together, they have a stimuli, and then they conversate afterwards is a medicine.
Ngithandile ngemovie, ngithanda indlela laba bangani laba abebehlangene ngayo nangewe bebesizana ngakhona.
Sengisho ugogo wayo sadlulile emhlabeni mhlambe angasekho umuntu mhlambe ongayiprovide ngento ezithile. Ukwazile ukuthi kube khona izinto ekwazi ukuthi izenzo so that izoba income ebanayo so that izoqhubeka nokuphila.
The Spark Impact program advocates for two things: the purpose and gig work. The gig work model is seeing yourself as an entrepreneur in what you do, turning that into a business. I've always known that I've been good with words. Why not pay me to share my thoughts? If you take pictures, invest time in that, skill up, and then make money out of it. If we didn't have a sandbox in this area, a whole lot of people would be still in the dark. It would be very sad because it is one thing that brings hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Throughout today's discussions, we have explored various responses to address labour market challenges. One important lesson, though, is that employment opportunities are constantly evolving. Supporting young people therefore requires us to invest not only in existing industries, but also in emerging sectors where the future demand is growing. Over to you, audience. Questions? I've got a lady over there and one over there, and I will come to you afterwards, and then I'll come to you, Vusi.
Thank you. This is Pitiri from the Nelson Mandela University. It seems there's a subtle assumption that work exists somewhere and we are unable to access it. Let me put it that way. However, the question remains unanswered, that where will the jobs come from my perspective. Let's look at the following stakeholders. Let's start from the top down. The Constitution does not promulgate the state to generate direct employment. However, it advocates for a creation of an environment that encourages thriving economic activity. Now, going to National Development Plan, the lady mentioned the NDP 2030. The generation of the needed jobs are supposed to come from the thriving economic activity and the SMEs. However, the department that is entrusted with the responsibility to empower those SMEs, they've released statistical evidence that about 70 to 90% of those.
Question, please.
They continue to fail. Okay. The question now is, and also it is my finding that we continue to have fragmented support systems. Now, what I'm posing is that don't we maybe need an arm of the state that can reinforce our milestones?
Thank you, sir. Right, where's the microphone now?
Hi,
Here you go.
I'm Nina Marie Anker from Stellenbosch University, and my question is about the role and the size of technological literacy and AI training specifically as aspects or focal areas in the work essay agenda's mandate, and how you see it in combination with the other factors or other focal areas of the umbrella mandate that is being proposed.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing. I think it's very important. So my question is to the PYE. So are we looking at rural development as one of the interventions to reduce youth unemployment? Are we looking at improving roads, electricity to generate employment through some of those construction projects and perhaps attract more investment in rural areas? And if not, what are some of the demand side interventions that we are working on? And just to echo the first speaker, where are the jobs going to come from? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vusi?
Sure, thanks. 3 questions quickly. The first one is from Talenta Mabasa. I suppose it goes to you, Mapaseka. What indicators do you use to determine whether programs have been successful beyond reporting the outputs, such as youth trained or youth placed? The second one from Pamelo Gibinelang goes to, the first part of it goes to Kate. And she asks, what is the difference between Social Employment Fund and Community Works Program? To Mapaseka, is Work SA Agenda Vision informed by the youth inputs? And lastly, Leslie asked a question. Given the scale of UE, should we still be thinking about creating jobs or designing mass employment using global demand, livelihoods development, and public service gaps?
Thank you, Vusi. You want to tackle the 2, 3 that came to you?
Thank you to the audience for your questions. I think Pitiri, and you didn't say your name, lady in the front. You're talking about where are the jobs coming from. I ask myself the question every day, where are the jobs and how are we going to get young people in the jobs? But to answer you, the broader framework of the Work SA, so we're not working in isolation as the PYEI, we work within the Project Management Office of the Presidency, and one of the structural reform agendas within the PMO is Operation Vulindlela, and they are responsible for creating that enabling environment for business to thrive and for the economy to actually grow. If you've noticed that there's been some significant changes in our energy supply, we have a lot more steady electricity now. So our ports are opening up, our rails are opening up, passenger rail transport is opening up more across the country. So those are all that is the reform agenda to restructure the economy, because we do realize that there are significant bottlenecks that are preventing economic growth from happening and therefore job creation from happening. But what the PYI does, it says that that's a long-term intervention. Right now we need to act. We need to act and make sure that young people are getting into jobs. And to respond to the question about the rural development and what we're doing, we realize that economic activity might not, be thriving in the rural economy, and that's why we have programs like a public employment program that will reach young people literally wherever they are. As part of the Innovation Fund, the mandate is that the implementing partners have to focus a cohort of their funding or their allocation has to go towards rural development and youth living in rural areas. So that's how we're able to intervene and reach young people living in rural areas. Ina Marie, you asked about AI and Work SA. Alex, can you help me about, I'm not sure about the data coming across from AI, but we do recognize that it is both an enabler for strengthening the work that we do across government, but also the types of work that young people can get into, which also speaks to the skilling system about the need to prepare young people to respond to AI. And then Talenta, about indicators. The indicators that we use, of course, we don't just look at inputs and training, we also look at outcomes. For example, we measure the number of young people who have sustained income earning opportunities or are still in a job at a 3-month mark, 6-month mark. That's part of the Jobs Boost. In the Innovation Fund, we look at indicators such as if a young person started something, if they started a small business, is it still thriving after 3 months? Is it still thriving after 6 months? So those are some of the indicators. They're different per program because each of the flagship interventions are meant to address a very specific challenge within the labor market. And then is the Work SA agenda informed by youth inputs? So we work with part of the ecosystem in the NPMN is an organization called YD Collab, the Youth Development Collaboration. And when we were drafting the strategy, we present in a technical committee to the ecosystem, like how do you respond to this? Is there something that we're missing? So it is through those channels and through those youth representing organizations that we're able to get inputs on the strategy from a youth perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You want to add something, Alex?
Quickly, Adam, I'm going to try to not repeat, but I'm going to say that if anybody up here or on any YouTube channel claim to really have the answer about what is going to be the impact of AI on the job market in a year or 3 years from now, I think they're looking for clicks as opposed to can claim that they really have the answer. I do think that a lot of you in the room are the answer to having the choices and the tools available to make the most of AI. It is true that if it is true that over the next 5 to 10 years, AI really fuel a big global upsurge in economic activity and GDP, that it is for us as society, as Kate said, to decide how we distribute that wealth windfall, and maybe then think differently about basic universal income or a more sustained and grant system. I think that's quite often we only think about the downside of AI in terms of the potential job loss, which in South Africa we've not seen any real significant evidence of directly. But if it is true that we'll have huge global economic growth, then it is up to us as society and human beings to decide to not put all that money into Sam's pocket, but redistribute it to everybody. Also, just quickly adding on monitoring and evaluation, I think there was some very good news throughout these last 2 days about increased M&E efforts, both from Treasury, also with the DBE program, and within the National Pathway Management Network.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, to Jackie, you want to add anything?
Just very briefly, where are the jobs going to come from? This is what keeps us all awake at night. Because it's the question that is hardest to ask. And part of the dilemma here is that on the one hand, if we want market-based jobs from the private sector, government can't tell the private sector what to do. That doesn't work. And yet the question is asked to government all the time, where are the jobs going to come from? But that's not to let government off the hook, because all these enabling things that we've been talking about, that energy works, that the ports work, that the roads don't have potholes, that that water licenses are, all of these are crucial enabling things and should enable the jobs to come. What we can't easily say is exactly where will the jobs come from. But I think it's just to acknowledge that this is the heart of the problem that we're all actually really grappling with. And to answer the specific question about CWP and social employment, there are definitely similarities in the two models. I think the CWP has, over the last few years, moved away from using NGOs as partners. It's implemented directly through COGTA, whereas social employment is implemented through partnerships with the non-state sector. I think CWP is also an area-based program mapped against municipalities and wards, whereas social employment is much more thematic. So you have work organized in food security or early childhood development, and it's not mapped, it's not spatially based in the same way. But a Treasury official once said to me, because implicit in the question is, isn't there duplication? A Treasury official once said to me, the day everybody in the country has access to the opportunities available is the day we start having to worry about duplication. Until we have reached everybody through our collective programs, actually duplication is not our biggest concern. Reaching everybody is.
Now, Shma, I can quickly list just the sectors that have come out of recent studies of this collective.
Yes.
So you can help me list them. There's last mile delivery, there's agriculture, particularly fruit and nuts. There is tourism, there is digital, there's platform business, there is According to a very recent PwC study, there's mining, also tourism, infrastructure, and ECD and installation, repair, and maintenance.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for that. So audience and panelists that are listening to today's discussion, it is clear that the challenge is not simply to run more programs. The challenge is to build an employment system that is aligned to the realities of our labor market, focused on outcomes rather than activity, and capable of turning public investment into real and sustained opportunities for young people. Thus, the question before us is not whether we are doing enough, but whether we are doing the right things, doing them well enough to make a measurable difference. We cannot wait for 50 years. We need to have greater focus on creating or reducing the barriers to self-employment. And that is a message from me to all of you. We haven't, we've spoken about informality, and sometimes we speak about informality and self-employment as intertwined activities. You've heard Prof. Sahi this morning. If we are going to get the employment levels up to a decent level, up to 10%, we're going to wait for 50 years plus. And so for all of the young people here, and for all of those who are not in the room, the message must be, and the understanding must be, and it must land for you, that if it's to be, it is up to me. It is up to you as an individual. And self-employment is an important aspect. And our role is to make sure that we zone in and hone in on what are those barriers to self-employment in our country. And how do we put in the requisite scaffolding, whether that is the social protection piece, whether that is the insurance piece, whether that is the security piece. How do we put that scaffolding in to make self-employment a more attractive option for all of us? We also have to think very carefully. What is the economic and development trajectory that we are putting our country on if we do not seize this moment to reimagine, to redesign, and to implement with vigor? For that, I thank all of you for being a wonderful audience, and I thank my panel for being absolutely awesome. And when you guys get into a funk and things become a little bit too much and you contemplate where are the jobs coming from, take a break.
Thank you.
That is for you. Thank you, Kate. That is really
A way to sign out. Thank you so much, Najwa, Dr. Kate, Alex Mapaseka, and Jackie. Thank you so much. They've been a fantastic panel, right? Let's give them a round of applause for that.